This conference will now be recorded.
All right, well, welcome out today to the next session of Law Review. We're going to talk about tort law and explore some of the ways that negligence, strict liability, and some of these legal principles are shaping businesses and society, as well as individual interactions. We're going to see some of that as well. We've got some really good real-life examples of that. So to get going, tort is something that's not always fully understood. And a tort, I don't know if the definition helps much at all. Tort's a French word, I think. But it's a wrongful act or an infringement of a right other than under a contract that leads to civil legal liability. So to break that down a little bit, a tort, if you commit a tort, you're not going to jail for it. So that's why it's civil liability, it's not criminal liability. One of the most common examples in our society is a car accident. If you rear end somebody, you generally have to pay that person. You can be liable for the damages you caused. It's a wrongful act. It's not, you didn't have a contract with that person that you hit in the car. So it's not governed by contract law. Generally, if you have a contract with someone, you've agreed with the business and you have things in place, you've kind of spelled out what your duties are, then the law will evaluate that under a different type of legal precedent under contract law. The torts are for when something bad happens to someone, you didn't have anything prearranged with the person. Well, I shouldn't say something bad. I should say it's a wrongful act you commit, or you infringe someone's rights. And so in the law, there are four things that they generally look to determine if a tort is compensable at law or if you have a cause of action in law for it. And the four elements usually are what they call duty, breach, causation, and damages. On the, or for today, we're really going to focus on duty because it's not, or because the other three aren't too difficult to break down legally, and they're not super relevant for evaluating the impact that it's having on society, this area of law. So we'll be focusing on duty, which ultimately means that we have some level of responsibility for our actions or for other people. And it will be interesting to see the different ways that this comes up. So when you're evaluating tort or negligence, we're always looking to see if you have a duty to someone. And if you do have a duty, whether you carried out that duty or not, that's what breach is looking at. And then causation is just asking, did me failing to follow my duty, did that cause the actual harm that occurred? And then damage is always looking to see if it's compensable in the law. If my feelings were just hurt, generally, then that won't be something compensable in the law. But if I suffered physical injury or something that money can make better, they will give money for that. So the first example today, we're going to explore negligence, just looking at the basic concept that the law has been building itself on. So Elias, could you read that example for us?
A ski resort includes on its ticket, ski at your own risk. Serious injury or death may occur. One of its customers is skiing downhill and is forced to ski close to the ski lift to avoid another person who fell down. The customer hits a metal pole sticking out of the ground that was left by a ski lift repairman earlier in the year and is seriously injured. Should the ski resort be liable?
Thanks. So in this situation, this is a real example. There's a pole left at a ski resort, and there's obviously trees and ski lifts and all kinds of things sticking out of the snow that people are supposed to avoid. And the ski resort tells people to be careful. So in this situation, the question is, basically the law is going to look at this question as, does the ski resort have a duty to its customers to keep things sticking out of the snow. And so essentially they're asking, is this something that the ski resort did wrong by having that left there, or is it a natural risk associated with skiing? So what are your thoughts on that? On whether the ski resort should be liable for this pole that was left?
Well, Austin, I feel that they should, given that it was one of their maintenance individuals that left it. And if this was like a shrub or a tree or something that was per se natural or, part of the habitat there, then I would say no, but this was something that could have been avoided.
Okay. So you're looking at it could have been avoided, so it should have been.
I would kind of agree with Ryan's assessment, not knowing necessarily what the scene looks like. If it's a pole that's maybe really close to one of the big poles that is like a power pole or something, if it was an easily noticeable, avoidable thing, then I would say probably it's on the skier, especially if it's within close to like a line of power poles or one of the big poles that go up for the tram or something like that. But if it's kind of in a weird place, I would say that I think it's more on the ski resort than the skier. It's not in an assumed place where it should be. That would be, and I hate even making that opinion, but that would be what I'd say.
Okay.
I think I'm just looking at intent. I think if the ski resort knew that that pole was there, they probably would have been pretty quick to get that removed because it wasn't supposed to be there. And the intent of ski at your own risk, even from the ski resort's perspective, is not having to ski around poles that aren't supposed to be there. So skiing is naturally dangerous. It could be, there's many different barrier, obstacles, but it wasn't supposed to be there. So I'm leaning that they probably should be held liable.
So here's a question, just to push back a little on where everyone is. Do you think that you should be able to, let's just say that the ski resort's more explicit in its warning, and it has a little contract you sign when you go, and it says, hey, we haven't combed the slopes. There could be an explosive device used for avalanche control. We had some independent contractors that came in to do some work. We haven't been able to go inspect what they've done yet. But you really want to get up skiing, and so you're going to ski at your own risk. We can't assume any liability for anything if you go on the mountain right now. Do you feel that's something that a right that people should be able to have, to say, I'm contracting out of all responsibility for what you're about to go do?
I think then that's on the skier then, right? That's my perspective.
Okay. Are there any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would agree with, I think that if they sign a waiver, right, and acknowledge that and accept that responsibility, that is definitely on the skier as well.
Okay. So let's take it just a little bit further with our society, because this is basically where almost all software is at. Is you have terms and conditions, and you click those. And so what if every ski resort says, hey, before you can come up, you need to accept our terms and conditions. And in those terms and conditions, a very strong waiver, a very strong thing, but no one ever reads it. We know no one ever reads it. They just click it, accept it, and move on. What should happen in that situation?
Austin, I'm just thinking we all take risks every day. We all make choices every day. We don't know what the outcome's going to be. We're just experiencing. And many people think everybody's responsibility is to take care of them, but things are going to happen. And it's going through those experiences that we take the responsibility of ourselves to understand that it's all not going to be perfect. It's not going to be the perfect ski down the trail. I don't think most people don't intend to harm on purpose. So it's just taking that chance. It's taking that understanding that life is just gonna give you some hardships, and whether it's because somebody else's negligence, it's just part of the journey. In my opinion, this is just kind of, it's just gonna be that way, and have an attitude to do your best to get through it and trust that you can. I mean, I don't know if these were looking for, hey, I can make some bunch of money. I don't know what their intent was, but for me as a mom, you can't control everybody else, but you can control your choice through the experience. So take responsibility yourself and don't blame it on others. And that's just my long short.
No, that's a great point. It's one that I feel is really important to look at when we're evaluating the impact that negligence is having on society, this concept. When we're here with the ski resort and we say, yeah, there's a pole sticking out of the ground, the ski resort should be responsible for that. We are starting to shift some of that responsibility that's inherent on ourselves to, like Leah says, to be careful, to understand that life has risks. Sometimes it's not necessarily anyone's fault, it's just what happens. But the law has favored placing responsibility on institutions with money. So if there's a big aggregate or pool of money, the law has been shifting responsibility there quite a bit. When that happens, we are losing individual accountability for our own actions. And it's very common for someone, as soon as they're injured or hurt, to blame somebody else for it. The law is really perpetuating this mindset. And it's an interesting concept to look at in our daily interactions with people, on our ability to succeed as just small business owners even. And we're going to go into some of these concepts a little bit more. But in this situation, just to answer some of the questions, the ski resort was found liable in this situation. The court went along the lines of what a lot of you said. This wasn't one of the inherent risks of skiing. Yeah, if they'd hit a tree, that would be something. But when you leave a pole and it's sticking up funny, that's on you. And so in this situation too, the law does allow for some waivers of liability to work. So for example, the first one we talked about, where it's very knowing, they sign it, they understand exactly what it is, the law would probably uphold that one. Ones that are in terms of use, click-through agreements, in a situation like this, probably would not be upheld. And so if you get into this funny situation of the court picking and choosing.
Can I want to jump in on the software thing. So, I mean, to me, so part of it is the general public doesn't understand, definitely a lot of courts don't understand the ability you can do with programming and things along those lines. So and some do, maybe some courts do, some judges do, some don't. But let's take it for instance. If you use Alexa, if you use a smartphone, we know that there have been multiple situations with multiple phone systems, with, I believe, iPhone, with Alexa, and some of these others, that not just Alexa and Apple, but some of their vendors that they use to create apps and things along those will listen to people in their intimate bedroom situations, shall we say. And, you can give away allow the government to surveil you. The government can now surveil off of your cell phones. And so that's, to me, where it gets to a whole new level of application when it comes to software, because it's very easy for those things to happen and you don't even know that it's going on. And even if you were read through the terms and conditions, it's pages and pages long, and it's hard for the lay person to understand that's what's going on in the terms and conditions. So to me, this is where it starts getting really dicey. Sorry for that long diatribe.
No, it's totally agreed, and it'll be an interesting exploration in contract law when we go through that, because yes, the law has come to a place where they allow contracts to be signed electronically, they allow contracts to be signed by clicking a button, and that's something that's probably necessary in some ways for today's current society, but it leads to places where companies can have a lot of power. And sometimes it's really scary to read actual terms and conditions and what some companies are asking for. I know there's some apps on my phone that have asked to install themselves, and I look at what they want access to, and it can just be a simple app to do one thing, and they want access to my contacts, my pictures, my phone history, to all kinds of things that just don't even make sense. And it's a very common thing for these businesses to take quite a bit to mine data and do a lot with that. There are obviously some laws starting to push back on that. California passed one recently. But again, these are ones we'll go into with privacy and contract areas, but it is definitely good to think about what is the proper way to handle situations like this. And the law has kind of addressed it with waivers. They're not a fan of just generic waivers to get out of all responsibility, and they will still stick places with some responsibility despite a waiver. But again, that produces some awkward situations too on both sides, so there's a balance. But we'll go on here and look at this situation. We'll hopefully just spend a few minutes here. Leah, do you want to read to us about Joe?
Joe is cutting large wood pieces with his chop saw. The guard on the blade keeps getting in the way. Joe removes the guard, fully aware that he needs to be extremely careful operating the saw without the guard. Joe is careful, but he is cutting. The saw blade suddenly flies off the saw and embeds itself into his thigh. It turns out the company that made the saw knew that the blade would come off the guard. They made the saw, knew that the blade would come off the guard if the guard was removed. So I can't say the word, but they had no specific warning on the saw. The only warning on the saw said, "Do not operate without the guard in place." Joe alleges that warning simply means he could get cut if he touched the blade, not that the blade would come off. Joe says it is not foreseeable to have the blade fly off the saw, and the saw is poorly designed. Should the saw company be liable?
Thank you. So this one's kind of it's kind of looking at the same issue as the ski resort, but he's basically going on those same principles, saying, hey, I knew that if I took the guard off, I needed to be careful and not cut myself. He says I was super careful to not cut myself, but suddenly the whole blade flew off and went into my thigh. And this, again, is a true story, unfortunate one. And he's saying this isn't part of the risk of taking a guard off of a saw to have the blade come off. That's not something that normally happens. And you didn't warn me about that risk specifically. And the saw is poorly designed. You should have designed it better. So he wants the saw company to be liable for his medical costs and the different issues he faced with having the saw blade in his thigh. What are your thoughts on that?
So Ryan Peck, the business owner, I think this is just absolutely ridiculous, right? Joe made a conscious decision to remove the guard, and he's responsible. And this is where it is very difficult at times to be a business owner, because things like this present itself, and you end up being held liable for something that really, Joe took the responsibility there and removed something that he shouldn't have. And so that would be my stand or my point on that, Austin.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I would say from the ski resort side, with the person running into a pole, they would say the same thing, that, well, that's just, you were the dumb one to run into something, from the way that they see it. But I
So
I
here,
certainly agree. Go ahead, John.
this you throw in what you stepped it up a little bit more tricky, because and I hate to even slightly, I don't even know how I feel completely on this, but it is out of standard expectations that if I remove a guard, that a blade's going to come flying off. Having worked in many wood shops around many equipment like that, it is out of standard expectation. So just because it's out of standard expectation, does that mean now they don't become liable because they didn't put that very specific disclaimer to Ryan's point? This is one where morally I would say they have an obligation, where maybe legally they don't. That I'm going to split hairs on that one.
Okay. I appreciate those thoughts. And it is true, in the saw industry, saw blades are not supposed to fly off if the guard's removed. Guards come off all the time. And saw blades don't normally come flying off. And so one of the things this gets to is, think about your blow dryer for your hair. And it has those warnings all over it. Do not operate in the tub and things like that. And typically what the law goes for in these situations on your duty to warn are things that are reasonably foreseeable, things that you foresee people doing with it. And so, for example, if you make some kind of device that people will use as a hammer all the time, and the device will break and cut their hand or something if they do, then you would need to disclose that on the thing if it's reasonably foreseeable that a decent number of people would do that. So to John's point, it's pretty foreseeable to a company that someone's going to take the guard off, and that there's another risk associated with it that the person's not going to anticipate. But yes, in this situation, the law came back and said, this warning was sufficient. Warnings don't have to go through and detail every little thing possible. And they also felt that, for whatever reason, the saw was okay on its design, but they didn't have a duty to design one that was safe when someone was trying to be unsafe with it. So to Ryan's point, it's a frustrating thing as a business owner, but it comes back again as we're looking at it to this interesting place of saying, well, where is the individual responsibility for the decision made? And again, looking at the effect on society, where we want to blame other people for things. And so we get to the point of nitpicking, well, yeah, you said it was dangerous if I took it off, but you didn't tell me why it was dangerous. And again, there is some merit to his claim that, well, I wasn't anticipating the blade to fly off. But legally, it gets into just very, very nitpicky type situations, very language-based situations about what did you warn on, what did you not. So some companies choose to have very extensive warnings. There's so many of them, you don't read any of them. Other ones choose to still go more simple and just make a more general statement. And there's a balance, and it depends on the product and other things. Eli, suggest something there.
Yeah, so this really happened, is what you're saying, right?
It did. Yeah, this is a true story.
It just makes me, because I've been in woodworking and framing and finished carpentry and a lot of different things, and there are a number of times where I need to take the guard off. So this actually makes me worried about taking the guard off a little bit more than I did, but I've never been hurt before because I know what I'm doing. I think John mentioned that as well, but just a side comment.
Yeah, no, and it's one I agree with too. Is I've been in framing, And yeah, there are times you take the guard off because you just can't get the job done otherwise. And it's probably stupid, and the private business should probably figure out a better way to do things. But sometimes it's your option, and that's what you do. But yes, I've operated many a saw, and luckily I've never had the blade come off. But that is it's one of those things about the risk we take, to Leah's point. When we do something we know we shouldn't, how much of it falls on us. So we'll keep going here to look at this, because this is now where negligence is heading. Negligence has become such an ingrained concept in our society that we're getting to this kind of place for businesses, which is called strict liability. So Ryan, could you read this one to us?
PG&E provides power in California. A serious drought creates very dry condition, which is then followed by a very high winds. Power lines and transistors spark in the wind and ignite many wildfires. PG&E can show that they trim 1.4 million trees per year and monitor every line each year. Should they be liable for the damages?
Yeah, so this one's a real situation. The court battles are still going on at the moment. But what are your thoughts on this? I don't know if you remember the California wildfires, entire towns burned down from these power lines.
So one of the things that makes this so hairy is they didn't, all throughout the country, they have basically fire breaks built in. You see that along the mountains in Utah where there's power lines and things along those lines, but they will have, that's part of what we've done historically. But California, for I believe like 50 years, has not allowed fire breaks and some of those other standard things that allowed them to have those fires go crazy like they did. And so this is where I fall down, and this is more on the state of California than it is on the part of the power company, and maybe their shared blame, because I don't know how well they actually do on their specifically, right? But it is very much a piece that California is just let grow and have not done the upkeep that most others, almost every other state in the union has done.
Yeah, so it's an interesting scenario. You're a company, and California doesn't even let you put in the all the standard safety procedures as a state. And so again, should you be liable? Let's just assume for a minute that, and this isn't necessarily entirely true, but it's the stance that PG&E is taking. They're saying we acted with all due care. We had a duty of responsibility to keep our lines safe. We did everything we could within our power. California only gives us so much money a year. They regulate how much we can charge customers. We have a very tight budget. We maintain to the fullest extent possible within that budget. We trim 1.4 million trees a year, get them away from the lines. And despite that, California's had serious drought, more serious than a lot of other times, followed by these high winds. We can't control these things. You don't let us put in the fire breaks. You don't let us do these other things. And so PG&E is defending, saying we weren't negligent. We did what we were supposed to do. What more would you ask of us? And the people responding in the lawsuit, they're suing. There's billions of dollars at issue here. Those suing say, we don't care if you were negligent or not. They say under California law, you're just responsible for any damage caused by your power line, regardless of why it happened. You're just responsible for it. And this is a concept called strict liability. And under California law, there's a very likely scenario that PG&E is just strictly liable, where even if you follow every single precaution legally possible or allowed, you're still 100% responsible for any damage that's caused by your business or services or other things. So, and this concept of strict liability is creeping in fairly extensively right now. It's in products. If you manufacture a product and it damages someone, even if you were fully responsible, you did everything you could to make it good, you're still liable for it. You see that in baby cribs when they get recalled. There's 110 million of them in use or something, and then 3 babies die and they have to recall all of them. Car seats, all these different things where even if you followed every single possible scenario, you're responsible for what happened. And so in this scenario, what are some of your thoughts on pros and cons of strict liability? Do you feel that strict liability is appropriate in some situations, in all situations, no situations? I'm just curious to hear your thoughts there.
This is where the law is becoming, things are becoming more and more difficult than what our founders anticipated and what they saw in many ways. Someone, you're riding your horse, or someone's riding on their horse. Something jumps up, spooks the horse, bucks you off, and the horse takes off and runs over and tramples a kid. I think back in the 1700s, 1800s, people just go, that's a terrible incident, and it's part of life. And where our complex society is, in some ways, is becoming more difficult. And strict liability, sometimes it's maybe warranted.
Yeah, and the situations, I guess, to give you a little more background too on how strict liability first came around was for abnormally dangerous activities. They said if you're going to, for example, keep a tiger on your property, let's say that the zoning laws don't restrict it, you found a legal loophole, you have a tiger sitting on your property. The law is going to say, you know what, you decided to engage in something so dangerous that you're just liable for whatever happens, even if you're fully responsible. You're still going to be liable if these things escape, if they hurt somebody, whatever. And so that's how strict liability first came about. And but since then, again, with the shift in our culture and how predominant this concept of negligence and shifting the responsibility is, it's becoming more and more common that normal everyday things are being given strict liability type scenarios. So as another example, in California, another one that's basically at strict liability levels is if you're a company and you have employees and one of your supervisors or managers sexually harasses a subordinate, you as a company are just automatically liable for that, no matter how well you responded, no matter how well you trained, no matter how well you tried to vet people and deal with the situation, be proactive about it beforehand. If something happens from a supervisor to a subordinate, the company's just liable. And these aren't small liabilities either. In California, they're pretty extensive. And California says, well, we have to make it so that these businesses take all kinds of precautions and measures because we've got to stamp this kind of stuff out. But business owners say, well, this makes it impossible to do business. And as a small business owner, if you're going to hire someone and they're going to manage somebody else, you have extreme worries now about these types of issues, because no matter how well you do things, no matter how much policies and procedures you put in place, if someone still chooses to violate that, you're on the hook. And so these strict liability concepts, again, are becoming very, very prevalent. We want cities, states, businesses, others to be responsible because there's one bad actor. And it's a concept that we see taking hold very, very strongly in so many situations. And again, it's one that's interesting to look at, but at the end of the day, one of the things that I feel this is doing is negligence and strict liability. They're destroying trust between people, and they are making it almost impossible for individuals to start a business. As a small person, how in the world do you start providing something when you can be sued and have everything taken away from you because something goes wrong at some point and someone else blames you for it? Just one other quick real life example on this. There's a software programmer. He's pretty smart, decides to start his own company. And he gets a job to program a machine. The machine processes some chemicals and some fluids. And from what everybody knows, the business people, the program, there's nothing harmful about the fluids. They're just a pretty benign chemical that they don't do much. So no one was super concerned. In his programming of the machine, he's doing it by himself and trying to make a go of it. He leaves out one piece, forgets to put an automatic shutoff in place if the chemical temperature becomes too high. And this wasn't a specific requirement. No one had listed it from the business side that it needed to shut off. But standard practice in the industry is if you are making a machine that can get warm, you want to have an automatic shutoff in place if it gets too hot. He forgot to program that in. The machine's working great. Besides, this program works great. It goes for a little while. And one night, the machine keeps going. Something went wrong in the machine. It started getting too hot. And this chemical overheated, started boiling. It boiled through one of the tubes. And when it spilled out onto the surface, it went into a gas form. And unbeknownst to him and the company, this chemical in a gas form was highly explosive. And so it started spilling out into the warehouse. Luckily, no one was in it. But the chemical ended up exploding from the heat. And it basically ruined most of the warehouse, ruined the machine and most of the warehouse. And this programmer sued for negligence because there wasn't a shutoff in place. And again, that one, there's a number of issues there that the courts will look at in determining whether or not he's liable. But one of the things is that the business itself never put in its specifications that it needed to shut off. And they hired someone that they knew was an individual, just one programmer going at it. They wanted to save money. And, is it possible for an individual programmer to start doing things, or are they always stuck having to work with all kinds of people, making sure there's all kinds of checks and reviews and processes in place? And these concepts of liability can make it very, very difficult to succeed. And we see that where companies get bigger and bigger, and smaller companies get bought up, and you have these big powerhouse players that then become the ones. And then the push becomes even stronger because we say, oh, PG&E has billions of dollars. Well, do they really? They have billions of dollars of infrastructure, yeah, but do they just have billions of dollars to dish out? No, because California regulates what they make. And so right now the discussion is if PG&E becomes liable, they have to apply to California for a rate hike for all Californians so they can afford to pay all the damages. And it's something that's interesting because now the cost of power has just gone up extensively with these types of liabilities in place because they'll have to create funds and get whatever else in place to deal with this in the future if they're strictly liable for it. So there's a real cost to society. This is the point.
So can I jump in on this?
Yep.
So this is the difficulty where you have federal district court, and you have state court, and you have states that are making laws and regulations for in one state that winds up becoming applied to others. I do think this is kind of where our founders intended, especially they intended for the ability for one state to be more strict than another, and it wouldn't However, we've now said, well, if in the court system, and I think under tort law or precedent law, if California sees a precedent, well, now someone else applies it somewhere else. And that's where I think one of the biggest difficulties we have now is, okay, it's okay for them to do it in their state, but it's against our rules, against our laws, against our or against our culture in this state. But now laws that they make over there now apply here, but we don't have any laws in the books. So that kind of play when you bring up this type of scenario, that's with California and everything. That's what's going through my mind.
For sure. Thanks for sharing that. It is a big issue both ways, because yes, we want states to have freedom for sure, and that's a very important aspect of things. But if you're a business and you put up a website, and it, how do you say, hey, this website's intended for Utah only? You can't restrict it to just Utah. And right now, California has incredibly different requirements for privacy and data security and all kinds of things for websites. And they have very hefty penalties if you don't comply, but the other 49 states haven't really jumped on board with that yet. They probably will in some fashion or another. But then if we get 50 states with 50 different privacy policy requirements, how as a business owner do you put up a website? How do you comply with something like that? Because a website is almost by definition, it's a worldwide thing. Even it's crossing borders into other countries that have all kinds of laws and all kinds of scenarios. And so it does become very, very complex issue to look at, but certainly to understand that for businesses, the complexity does get large. Even if you're a business and you go to this state to do one thing and that state to do another thing, then there's income tax laws, there's sales tax laws, there's all kinds of laws that follow you. And the burden of compliance is so large in our world that's so connected. So again, these are things that impact us, that make us scared to move, that make people become more fearful, afraid. We don't know how our actions today will produce liability in California or Oregon or Washington. And it certainly creates a place, I think, that makes a lot of people not do things. We stop doing things. I can't tell you how many times I've heard someone say, oh, I'd love to do that, but too afraid of the liability. Someone will sue me. So we'll go on just to reach another point really quickly before our time's up. So this is a situation. This one is kind of made up. It just follows things generally, but it's to highlight a point about the mix of negligence and capitalism. And so we're saying MedX is a healthcare device company. They make this new technique that can reduce the recovery times in surgeries by more than half, and it can reduce complications, including accidental deaths, by 0.5%. But it's a very expensive device and technique, and your local hospital can't afford it. You go get surgery there and have some serious complications. Now, if the hospital had implemented the latest and greatest technology, then you're alleging that these issues could have been avoided. So the question is, should the hospital be liable for not adopting the latest and greatest technologies? Are they negligent by failing to do that?
So for me, I would say no. I think I kind of go back to Leah and some of her discussion, right? I mean, we ultimately have the choice, right? As a consumer, as a patient, where we need to educate ourselves as well, right? And we need to take responsibility at times for the different things that happen, right? So if we were going to have this surgery, I feel like it's part of our due diligence or our responsibility to do the research, right? To look in and see what's out there. And if we feel that this would improve, our odds for survival or even the recovery, it's of us to go ahead and present that. And if the one hospital or the provider doesn't provide it, then we should look elsewhere.
Okay, those are some great thoughts, and I agree with a lot of the points. I'll just ask the question, what about if you were taken there in an ambulance?
So good point. You know, I think at that point, I mean, how could the hospital be held responsible for that, right? I mean, it's an emergency. It's something that was not foreseen. So you're taken to the closest hospital by, and then at the end of the day, if a hospital had to go to the extent of every time a new company or maybe pharmaceutical company came out with a new medicine, I mean, it would be next to impossible to maintain that type of a model, not only from a resource standpoint, but just think of the economic impact that would have.
Yeah, no, for sure. Thanks for
This
those
is
thoughts.
where, to some extent, you have to trust the jury. If, say, like it's a medical procedure or they have technology, but one hospital is using the technology that is, the scenario you said doesn't apply to this, but let's say they have the technology that is 30 years old and it's now standard of care that it is a bad form of care. This comes in the area where maybe they're liable, but if it's like on the a hospital has this machine and it's on the very cutting edge, hospital in Salt Lake City has it, but for me that lives down in southern Utah County, I get taken to Payson where maybe they're 5 years behind. No, I don't think they should be liable. But if it's like 40 years behind and it's way out of standard of care, then that's where the question may be, it is on the hospital, because also hospitals are supposed to say, we can't take that patient for this. And how does that apply even more to a hospital in Richfield or something along those lines? That's where things get really dicey, and where I still trust juries to an extent.
Okay, thanks for those thoughts. Elias, did you have something there? I guess Leah too. Leah, you have something?
I just go back to, you can't do more than you can do. I think the hospitals have regulations, things to do what they can. I think anybody, too many people are looking to put the blame on somebody else and not just take personal responsibility. I think generally everybody's doing their best to provide the best they can. And I think too many people are wanting everybody else to take care of themselves and not realize that this is just part of your life experience. And it just goes back to, everybody wants everybody to fix everything. Nothing's going to be fixed. It's not anybody's job to fix it, but just to improve and to do the best you can. I just have a hard time with all this forcing and not taking that responsibility of just living life and doing your best. So when you get in these laws, I'm just shaking my head, like a lot of this is just trying to please everybody else and make their life this cushy little bed in the corner of the room. It's not, I don't know. This is just frustrating as you're saying these things. I'm just, as a mom, trying to look at my kids and give them, hey, just go and do your best. And if your best, that's good enough. I don't care if you get C's and D's. If you did your best in school, that's great. And next time you'll find something else to make it better. We're not reaching our full potential by letting other people take the responsibility of what we could do. And people are going to die. People are going to have challenges. Sorry, my little rant.
It is really good to really delve into this, because on it there is a struggle, there's a tension in this type of tort law, because When it began, it was very much to force people to take responsibility for the things they did that harmed somebody. So for example, if I crash into someone and it's truly my fault, but I refuse to pay, or I throw a rock through someone's window and I refuse to pay, these laws arose out of trying to make people responsible for their actions, saying, hey, you can't just go crash into someone's car and not do anything about it. You've got to pay them. So it started there in a responsibility mindset for sure. That's why there's this duty aspect. The law would say, do you really have a duty here? Do you have a responsibility? But that concept has grown aggressively and it's turned into something else. And I think what you're talking about is where we've crossed the line into, now it's just abdicating ourselves of personal responsibility in so many situations. And it is becoming a dangerous precedent and foundation in the law that's very troubling, because in this situation here with the hospital, John had mentioned something called the standard of care. And yes, the second a new device comes out, you're not required to get it. But at some point, once there become enough hospitals with it, it becomes part of the standard. The standard now increases. And if you don't follow that standard, you can absolutely be sued for negligence for not arising to the new standard. So what this does for capitalism is it presents a fascinating issue, meaning it makes it so that there's no cap now on research and development costs. Companies can go spend billions and billions of dollars in the health world developing something that improves conditions by 0.5%. And if they can get enough hospitals to adopt it, so it becomes part of this recognized standard, then people, the rest of them, have to buy it. And it's the same with pharmaceuticals, it's the same with other things. And these hospitals, if you look at them, they're always embracing the newest, greatest, latest technology, burning through machines and things at a super high rate. To Ryan's point, is this incredibly expensive? Yeah. In my opinion, this is one of the largest driver of healthcare costs. People say it's not, because what they look at to determine how much tort law increases cost of healthcare is they look at the amount that companies have to pay out. So they say, oh, hospitals only had to pay out $1 billion, for example, in lawsuits. Well, yeah, but the cost to avoid those lawsuits that these hospitals go to is just extremely outrageous. And the cost of healthcare just skyrockets at that point. And again, capitalism knows if you're a company, go pump a few $1 billion into something and improve something by 0.5%. And as long as you've got a sales program in place or a few hospitals that adopt it, you can make it part of the standard of care that then everyone has to follow. And so it really takes away some of the market, the normal market conditions of capitalism, the whole competition and things, and it makes it so we have this unlimited pool of expenses, and then we as people get stuck paying that, and we watch our healthcare premiums skyrocket and these other things skyrocket. So it's an interesting thing to look at, because at some point we have to come back and say, no, I should be able to go to a hospital, and the hospital should be able to say, we're way cheaper. We use 40-year-old technology for surgeries. Come here at your own risk. And I choose if that's something I want or not. And if I need a life-saving surgery and they're the only person in realm, within distance of saving my life, then hey, why should they be liable? They're a lower cost option. They're viable. They do things with whatever standard they take on and allow that kind of thing to happen.
I'd like to get Ryan and your thought on this. So let me kind of put a scenario to this a little bit. So let's say that equipment is $1 million to purchase or a couple $1 million, but 10 years later, 3 years later, 5 years later, it's a $5 to $10 million piece of equipment, or not a 5 to 10, excuse me, a $5 to $10,000 piece of equipment that basically any, you have, so one thing that happens with a hospital, in order to be a hospital, a functioning hospital, they have to achieve certain levels of care. And that multi-million-dollar thing after 5 years now has become $10,000. Where does the rubber meet the road on that? And I really want both your and Ryan and even Renee's thoughts. I mean, I think that's a somewhat realistic, real-world application. So I'm curious on your guys' thoughts, because, like I said, this is one of those things that's a little hard to figure out, right?
Yeah, and I'll share my thought really quickly, and we will have to get done here because it is 8:30. My thought, I'm a little harsh, but I say let companies disclose to people that they haven't adopted the latest and greatest. And if people still choose to use them, then people value that for some reason more than something else. And once it gets down to a $5,000 or $10,000 piece of equipment, if they're losing business over not having that equipment, then they'll buy it and implement it on their own. If they're not losing business over it and people are still going there, I say let people make that decision. Again, I'm a fan of disclosure, but to me the responsibility is balanced by having disclosure and just creating free market conditions where people know what they're getting themselves into. They know that that's the kind of hospital you are or the kind of doctor you are, and they choose to go there, because they like the old-fashioned remedies or they like the lower costs or whatever it is. Choose those risks on their own. And to me, we don't have to draw a line with disclosure because the market will, people will. If people value something, they'll go to a place that has it, that place will lose business. And if they want to stay in business, they'll get their $10,000 machine in place. But if
So
the
it's
cost is too high and they still
kind of what I
have
throw
business,
in is emergency room versus, to some extent, it's emergency room, right? You get taken there without your choice versus if you go there with choice. Sorry, I'll shut up.
No, so emergency room, I would say too, people should take the responsibility. And I'm a fan of, if you want to record, you have certain preference on emergency rooms, only take me to the latest and greatest emergency room, even if I die along the way. We kind of look at it as I have a right to be treated at the highest level of care if there's an emergency. But that's not entirely true, because if, let's say that there's a doctor and he's the only doctor in range to save your life and he does his best, if you insist that that doctor have everything in place, then we're going to reduce the number of doctors considerably. But if you allow people to be there and maybe they can save 50% of the people, well, we're now 50% better than we were by not having that doctor there in the first place, because they can operate at a level of certain quality. And again, this is a very market-based situation. And I'm fine if someone wants to put a tag on themselves that says, you know what, come whatever emergency, only take me to the latest and greatest emergency room. If that's what they want and they want to take the risk that they don't make it that far, then I say sure. But otherwise, if you are in areas and there's issues, to Leah's point, I think these are risks you take inherent in life. If I go out into the UNs, I know I'm pretty far away from an emergency room. And if I fall, my chance of survival is far less than if I fell in Salt Lake City or something like that. So that's how I come down on it. I know I'm probably a little harsh, but I feel strongly that to really balance this, to right this ship, you could say, that's gone too far, I think we really, really need to push for disclosures, and let people say where they're at, let them say what they do, and not require them by absolute law to follow certain standards, and let people decide, again, assuming that you actually disclose to them. And it's, I'd love to keep going on this conversation here. There's points, we'll just have to get off here because of the time. But I will throw this out just super fast in where we're going with this. We're getting to, again, a very, very personal level, where with coronavirus, what are our duties with coronavirus? With where the law has taken us, if you're a business owner and someone gets sick in your business establishment, how liable are you for that? There's already lawsuits flying on this. It's a very real issue. And to what extent do we say we're responsible for our own self, or the business owners are liable to keep us in a good place. And we have people for schools and co-ops are looking and saying, hey, what's the liability of the school if a kid gets coronavirus here or takes coronavirus home because they're here? Have we followed our duty if everyone wears masks? Have we followed our duty if everyone social distances? What if they don't? There's a ton of fear right now circulating, and there's businesses that are choosing not to reopen because they're so afraid of these issues. And it's again a thing that's coming down to look at and say, where are we as a society? Are we in a place that is healthy, or are we in a place where we're so driven by fear that we're making decisions out of fear? And to me, with what I'm seeing happen, I feel we're a place of fear. We're terrified of everyone because everyone will blame us for things. And we've come so far down this road of shifting responsibility in the law that it makes it very difficult for society to function, for people to interact. Because now if we're at a place where spreading coronavirus is a cause for a lawsuit, then we're only a hop, skip, and a jump away from spreading the flu as being a cause for a lawsuit, or something simple like that. And when we're at that place, just daily interactions of life start to break down so extensively. And again, these are things that come as a result of the law, result of where people are at, and they just have such significant impacts on the way we think, the way we view things. So I advocate strongly for people being able to have a freedom to contract, a business owner being able to say, hey, here's a sign, I don't disinfect daily. People may not wear masks. People may not social distance. Come in at your own risk. And if you disclose that to people and people choose to go in, then I say, hey, that should be on the person that's in there, not on the business owner at that point. So anyways, those are some thoughts. Definitely a lot of freedom issues, I feel, in how negligence and strict liability are shaping our society. But to me, they're really pushing to say those with money, those with power are responsible to right every wrong. And we have to come back to a good place of balance there and come back to, I think, more where Lee is at, to say we need to stand up for the responsibility of individuals and push back on these laws and these, what's the word, these social policies or these movements that are really transferring a lot of responsibility away from the individual. So I'll let you get going now. Sorry to keep you over a little bit, but we will plan on continuing these discussions and other principles. So thank you for your time today, and we will see you another time.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys. Have a good day.
Too.